Thank you so much, Jordan. It's great to be here. Thank you for the honor of attending your first virtual meeting. It gladdens my heart, actually, when these occasions take place. So, as is very clear from that introduction, which is very well researched, I do have a disability, but I'm here to prove that short people can use Zoom as well. So, let me tell you a little bit about me. I am Chief Executive of Workbridge, which is an organization that seeks to find employment for disabled people. And at a time like this, it doesn't seem terribly opportune to talk about that when no one is hiring. But one thing that is germane to this discussion is to perhaps reflect on the biggest barrier that blind people and many disabled people face. And it's probably not what you think. The biggest barrier for many of us is other people's attitudes. And so often I have gone in for a job interview in various professions that I've held, and you can tell that people, in my case, shut their eyes and think, gosh, if I were a blind person, I just don't know how I could do this job, and therefore he can't either. And so often it requires confidence that many people don't have. It requires some trust to appreciate that there are many alternative ways of getting a job done that don't involve sight. And sight is such a dominant sense when you have it. It uses a lot of brain power. There are all sorts of estimates about a very high percentage of information that people acquire from vision. And so it's very hard for people to imagine anything otherwise. I've spent a lot of my life, I guess, proving people wrong. I was the first blind person, first congenitally blind person to stand for Parliament. I've worked in radio broadcasting, set up my own internet startups, including an internet radio station, which I still run, which is staffed by blind volunteers. And I've had the privilege to work in a range of professions. For me, the self-isolation that we're now in is back to the way that I used to work. For about 20 years, I worked for organizations that were largely technology focused, where for many this was the normal, and it was my normal. And so it's been great to be able to share my knowledge with others, both disabled and not, over the last couple of weeks about working from home. In a previous life, I ran a consultancy company where I worked a lot with app developers in particular, large and small, to make sure that their apps were accessible to blind people. And I would also produce books and audio tutorials to teach blind people how to make the most of technology. Because I think the technology that we now have at our disposal has really changed what it means to be blind. There's never been a better time to be a blind person than now. And interestingly, one of the projects that I put together when I was running that company was a book, an audio book called Meet Me Accessibly. And it's about a 3.5-hour long audio tutorial that teaches blind people how to use Zoom, of all things. And I still keep some of my material available on my website. And every so often I check in to make sure that things haven't changed so much as they do regularly in technology, that what I'm selling is obsolete. And I checked in last week, and maybe it was 2 weeks ago. Time actually gets a bit of a blur when you're in this state, doesn't it? I checked in at some point and found that sales of my Zoom audio book had skyrocketed because so many blind people from all around the world, students, workers of all kinds, were working from home, and they had to come to terms with how the technology that they use works with Zoom. And I felt a real pang of guilt because I am a chief executive. I don't need the money, and I felt really uncomfortable about profiting from this need that blind people had to use Zoom. So I went back to the beginning of March and refunded everybody who had bought the book since the beginning of March. And then I just made it freeware. I gave it away. And there's been an amazing response after doing that, giving the book away. And it's had many thousands of downloads. And I feel really pleased that I was able to make that contribution. But somehow it got back to the people who make the Zoom software. And they contacted me and they said, how much did you used to sell your audio tutorial for? And I told them it was $35 US. And they said, look, we've got a lot of business from your audio book. And they gave me a very nice sort of compensation for making it free. So it just goes to show that is karma in action and most unexpected. What I thought might be useful is to talk about self-isolation from a blindness perspective. These days, it's actually much easier to do this self-isolation thing. So to give you a bit of background, I have 4 adult children. And when my first daughter was born, everybody used to sort of say to my wife and me, is she, you know, like you? And, you know, they didn't want to mention the B word. They didn't want to say, is she blind? So we thought about the teachable moment that was coming from this. We came up with the stock phrase that said, actually, she's sighted, but we love her just the same. So we have 4 adult children now. And so we're on our own. We're empty nesters. We're living in this big house, 2 blind people on our own, with just the guide dog and each other for company. And in earlier times, that might have been extremely problematic to last a month that way. First of all, though, blind people can use computer technology very easily, thanks to technology called a screen reader. And screen readers are built into many computers now. You can buy some third-party ones that do more things, but essentially any Windows computer, any iPhone, any Android device has software built in now that allows a blind person to walk up to any computer and use it very effectively. And that's, of course, how I do my job as chief executive. I work with Microsoft Office, answering lots of emails, working with Microsoft Teams, which we use at Workbridge. I also am a podcaster, so I use quite complex audio production technology to do my podcasts. But there are also some very specific and helpful blindness applications. Before I came to Workbridge, I was working for a startup in San Diego called Aira. And Aira uses the camera on a smartphone to connect you with a fully trained assistant. So there is a voluntary version of this, but these people at Aira are fully trained. They can remote into your computer and help you with any tasks, inaccessible websites, that sort of thing. And essentially they can do everything from helping you to differentiate the baked beans from the peaches, which if you're having a dinner party is a pretty big deal, all the way through to guiding you in unfamiliar places. So my wife and I would, for example, in the past, walk through a farmer's market, and Ira would be able to tell us, just coming up on your right, you've got the store that's selling, you know, peaches or whatever it happens to be, and we can walk around without any real-time sighted assistance and use that service. So Ira also can help with a wide range of identifying tasks. It's really fantastic. And potentially it can help with social distancing, because if you really have to go to a supermarket, then obviously they can help you navigate without you having to breach physical distancing rules and hold on to people's elbows. So that's pretty cool technology. Also, there's software that's available either through a traditional scanner, like the ones that we often see in offices these days, or even just using your phone's camera that will take a picture of a document and immediately speak it. So that allows my wife and me to read mail. If mail comes in the letterbox, we can read that and it will speak it in a pretty clear voice. We can save the document, deal with it later. And that's, of course, also how I deal with a lot of printed material. There is a range of book software out there now. Of course, a lot of people are into technology like Kindle and Apple Books, and that technology is fully accessible to blind people. And one of the biggest problems that blind people have faced over the years is access to information. Blindness is fundamentally an information disability because so much information is visual. And now that is really less and less the case. We've got so many books that we can choose from services like Kindle and various other services of that nature. Also, of course, there is online shopping if you can get a delivery. And I think that is the one thing that has slightly spooked me about this process, is that we did what we were advised to do. We didn't panic shop. We didn't buy in masses of bulk. And then it has been very, very difficult for us to get a food delivery. We're very fortunate to have people who will volunteer to drop stuff outside our door, and we're very grateful for that. But I started using online shopping in 1996, And the first thing that just occurred to me was I had no idea how much choice, how many choices sighted people have to make every day about the most trivial things, like which loaf of bread to buy or what type of milk to get. It was just a complete revelation to me how many varieties of different products were available on the shelves. And of course, now they're available on the virtual shelves. And so shopping online is a really big deal, particularly for things like, well, in better times, things like birthday presents, being able to shop for flowers or music or gifts, anything like that online. It's a huge thing. Even banking, for example. In the past, before we went online, it was a pretty undignified thing going into a bank as a blind person, because everybody naturally assumes that if you are blind, naturally they have to speak a bit louder. And so you will go into a bank and they'll say, you know, you're $500 overdrawn, Mr. Mosen, at the top of their voice. And we didn't have independent access to our private banking information before, and now we do. And things like Apple Pay and other technologies make it even easier still. So there are so many ways in which technology has enhanced our lives. Because I have developed a lot of this technology that I'm talking about, I've had a hand in quite a bit of it. I am understandably a bit of a geek, and our house is very automated. We can speak to our heating and set the temperature. We can turn different lights in different rooms on and off with voice commands. And it really is a fantastic time to be self-isolating. If this had happened, say, 20 years ago, it would have been much more difficult. But I think because of the impact of this technology, we are essentially a bit ahead of the curve. So some of the things that blind people have been doing for years, sighted people are just catching up with, and that's actually a pattern. So the first LP record was developed in the 1930s, and its purpose was to deliver talking books. There was a guy who talked to another guy on a plane in the mid-1970s. He was a very young, talented scientist by the name of Ray Kurzweil. He happened to sit next to a blind person on an aircraft in the United States, and the blind person said, wouldn't it be interesting if we could have a machine that would read print, because this is a big problem for me. Ray Kurzweil developed that machine, a big thing the size of a washing machine in the 1970s that read print to blind people for the first time, and now that's metamorphosized into the scanner that many offices have on people's desks. Blind people were using little braille devices on which they took notes and did various things long before the PDA for sighted people came along, and that was the precursor to today's smartphones. So it's pretty cool the way that disability technology has really paved the way for the technology that is enjoyed in the mainstream these days. So self-isolation is pretty good. I'm kind of proud of the fact that I have lots of calls from sighted colleagues and friends asking me questions about Zoom and various other technologies that I've been able to have a hand in writing up. The one thing I would close with is that, of course, that is all presupposing that you have access to this technology. And one of the biggest things that concerns me greatly is the digital divide. It's a concern for all of us, but I think particularly because of the way that technology can mitigate disability, and blindness is my example. If you don't have access to it, you're at an increasing disadvantage. And conversely, if you do, it's amazing what's possible, what you can achieve. So we are self-isolating and quite enjoying the experience. And we're just thankful that if it had to happen, it is happening now. So I hope that little glimpse into the world of my technology and the way that we're handling this has been helpful. And I'm very happy to answer questions either by voice if you want to just unmute and ask, or via the chat room is fine too. The question about whether I see the current situation as a time to address the digital divide, I do hope that when this is over, we will have a really good think about rebuilding New Zealand. I think this, for every crisis, there's an opportunity. And I think the opportunity that stems from this is a much more compassionate, fairer New Zealand. And I would like to think that we will, when the time now is to knuckle down, support one another, support our leaders and get through this. But eventually we will need to think about, why has it been so difficult for disabled people who really genuinely need it to survive, to get supermarket deliveries online and various other things like that. How disadvantaged have those without the means been to survive this? And so, yes, I think this is a real opportunity for us to put it right and to build a better country. I think your question about what can be done to enable more equitable access to technology, I think that it's all about the way that we perceive this technology. So for many people, if you read the newspaper on an iPad, or do your banking online, or do your shopping online, that's actually a convenience, and it's a choice, it's a preference. For me and many disabled people like me, it's the only way to get at that information. I'm the youngest of 5 children, and I used to pester my older sighted siblings to read the newspaper to me, even as a kid, because I was such a news junkie. And now I can read any newspaper in the world as long as it's produced accessibly. Sadly, the New Zealand Herald is not, but a lot of the other newspapers are produced accessibly, and it's incredibly empowering. So I think it's about distinguishing the difference between the fact that for disabled people, these things are not nice to haves. They're about inclusion. They're about being able to participate, about civic duty as well. So I'd like to think that a future government program might say, actually, we just need to put a PC or a Mac or a tablet in the hands of every disabled person who has a genuine need for it from a social inclusion perspective. My podcast, okay, so I run 2. One is called Mosen at Large, which is my kind of, it's my personal podcast. I've been broadcasting on the internet for 21 years, and I started an internet startup 21 years ago that brought the blind community together from around the world. So it's still going, but we had about 110 countries listening, and volunteers from 9 or 10 countries. And my podcast, Mosen at Large, is a way to keep in touch with that audience. And I publish an episode every Sunday, and you can find it everywhere that you get your podcasts, and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Google Home. And at the moment, it's serving a really amazing purpose, because we have blind people from all around the world calling in and emailing in, telling about their struggles or hints and tips relating to COVID-19. And it's made me feel very humble that I can play that role in bringing blind people together to communicate in that way. That's a really good question, Denise, about what Rotary could do. Rotary has been a fantastic partner to the blind community over many years. And I know that sometimes when there's a piece of equipment that falls through the government cracks that a blind person or a person with any kind of disability actually would really like, I know people have made approaches to local Rotary clubs and have often been very warmly received. And so I think that that's a contribution that could be made as well. And hopefully I haven't missed any questions there.
No, I don't think so, Jonathan. I think, Jordan, that's back to you now.
I think so. I think I'll just obviously quickly touch base one more time to see if there's any final questions. We do have one coming in from Helen asking if there is a way to tap in immediately to people who have a specific need. Jonathan, is that something you're aware of?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, Jordan, I just had my computer chatting in my ear at the same time as you.
Apologies.
Yeah.
Helen has asked, is there a way to tap in immediately to people that have a specific need?
To tap in immediately? I think, I know that the Blind Foundation is always looking for volunteers, for example. To me, the most pressing need in the context of the COVID-19 crisis is actually seeing if we can find those people who may be having trouble getting food right now. I finally managed to get a slot by staying up till midnight and sort of hitting the button until it refreshed. So it's a dire situation there, and I think that's a yes, small amounts of money for food and technology. I don't have a direct answer to the question, but I think some of the organizations that target or that provide services to specific disability groups, such as the Blind Foundation or CCS Disability Action, would be good places to start.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Jonathan. Well, yeah, thank you, obviously, for speaking to us all today over this new technology, which is coming, or technology is coming a bit of a new experience for a lot of people, I imagine. Very much appreciate, obviously, your approach to tackling, disability rights, and obviously, sort of taking lead on changing people's attitude. Very sort of particular point, obviously, that you brought up that I think is very, very important, is obviously you truly sort of embodying at least the Rotary spirit of service above self, especially with your sort of providing your audio book on Zoom free of charge, and going back and actually retroactively refunding people as well. I think that sort of speaks a lot to your character and a lot to the cause you're championing. So yeah, thank you very, very much for taking time today to speak to us.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the opportunity.